The decision did not come with drums or songs. There was no big announcement, no celebration. No warning, it came quietly, the way hunger always does. In the village of Umuaka, the land had stopped giving. The rains came late, and when they came, they were weak. Yams grew small. The river shrank. Fish died. Goats cried from hunger. At night, children slept with empty stomachs and woke up weaker than the day before. That was when the elders said it out loud. There is not enough for everyone. And that was when fathers chose sons. Aminata was 13 years old when she learned that she did not matter as much as her brothers. She had always felt it, but that was the year she understood it clearly. She was the third child of her father, Bala. Her first child was a boy, Sadiq. Her second was a girl, Zainab. Then came Aminata. After her came another boy, Usman. 2 boys, 2 girls. But in hard times, numbers stopped meaning anything. What mattered was who would carry the family name, who would inherit land, who would stay. Girls were not counted the same way. Girls were meant to leave. Aminata woke up early one morning and heard her mother crying quietly. Not loud crying, the kind of crying women did when they didn't want to be heard. Her mother, Ruqayya, sat by the wall with her face turned away, pressing her wrapper to her mouth. Aminata pretended to sleep. Outside, men were gathering. She heard her father's voice. She heard other men too, uncles, elders, neighbors. They spoke slowly, carefully, like people who knew every word carried weight. "The boys must eat," one man said. "They will grow strong," another replied. "They will protect us." No one mentioned daughters. No one said girls need food too. When the sun rose, Aminata's mother gave her a small portion of pap. Smaller than the one she gave Sadiq. Much smaller than the one she gave Usman. Aminata said nothing. Girls who spoke too much were called disrespectful. Later that day, the elders met under the old tree near the river. Aminata was not allowed there, but she watched from a distance with other girls. They pretended to fetch water, but everyone knew why they stayed close. That was the day the rule was spoken again, the rule that had always existed. In times of hunger, the chief said, "We protect our sons." The men nodded. "The daughters will marry," another elder added. "They will belong to other families." That sentence ended everything. From that day, food was divided differently. Boys ate first. Boys were taught how to hunt, how to farm, how to speak in meetings. Girls learned how to kneel properly, how to cook with little food, how to keep quiet. Aminata's sister Zainab had already been married off at 14. She had cried the night before she left. Not because she loved her family so much, but because she was afraid. She had returned once, thin and quiet, with a baby tied to her back and bruises she never explained. After that visit, Aminata knew marriage was not a reward. It was a removal. When Aminata turned 13, her name began to move from mouth to mouth. "She is growing," women said. "She will bring cows," men said. Her father started looking at her differently, not as a child, not as someone who belonged, but as something that could be exchanged. One evening, Bala called Aminata's mother aside. "She will marry soon," he said. Ruqayya did not argue. Arguing changed nothing. "But she is still small," Ruqayya whispered. So was her sister. That night, Aminata heard everything. She lay awake, listening to her brothers breathe, listening to her mother cry again, listening to her own heart beat fast in her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask why. Why were boys chosen and girls pushed away? Why did her body mean more than her mind? Why was her future already decided? But she said nothing. Girls survived by silence. When the man came to see her, he did not ask her name. He asked her father how many children she could give. He asked if she obeyed. He asked if she could work. Aminata stood in the corner with her eyes down, her hands shaking. That night, her mother held her tightly. "You must endure," Ruqayya whispered. "That is how women survive." Aminata wanted to ask, "Is surviving the same as living?" But she already knew the answer. In Umuaka, girls were not raised to live. They were raised to endure. Years later, elders would say it was tradition. They would say it was necessary. They would say it saved the village. But the truth lived in the bodies of women like Aminata, in their broken dreams, in their early graves, in the daughters they taught to be quiet so they would not be destroyed. And even though fathers chose sons, it was women who carried the weight of that choice for generations. Aminata was married before her body finished growing. There was no waiting for her to become a woman. The elders said hunger did not wait, so neither should tradition. She was given to a man named Haruna from a village 2 days' walk away. He was much older. He already had one wife who had not given him a son yet, and that was considered a problem. On the morning she left Umuaka, Aminata did not cry. Crying would not stop anything. Her mother tied her wrapper carefully, as if neatness could protect her. Her father stood outside and spoke proudly to the men, counting the goats he would receive. No one asked Aminata how she felt. When she hugged her younger brothers goodbye, they barely looked at her. They had already learned that sisters leave. Sisters disappear. Marriage did not feel like entering a new home. It felt like being delivered. Haruna's compound was quiet and heavy. His first wife, Safia, looked at Aminata with tired eyes. There was no jealousy, only exhaustion. She helped Aminata bathe, helped her dress, and whispered instructions without emotion. Do not argue. Do not refuse. Do not cry loudly. That night, Aminata learned what it meant to be a wife. No one explained anything. Her fear was treated as ignorance. Her pain was treated as duty. When she bled, Safia cleaned her silently. When Aminata shook, Safia held her and said nothing. There were no words that could make it better. From that day, Aminata's life followed one path: work, silence, pregnancy. She became pregnant before she turned 14. Her body was not ready. She vomited constantly. Her back hurt. Her hips ached. The older women said it was normal. They said suffering meant she was fertile. They said pain was proof that her body was doing what it was made for. She gave birth to her first child after 2 days of labor. It was a girl. No one celebrated. Haruna barely looked at the baby. The women congratulated Aminata politely, then whispered that she must try again. A girl was not failure, but she was not success either. Aminata named her daughter Maria. She loved her fiercely. Too fiercely, some said. She held her longer than necessary. She sang to her even when she was tired. She feared for her, already imagining the same road waiting. 2 years later, Aminata became pregnant again. This time, she nearly died. Her body weakened. Her bleeding did not stop. There was no healer nearby. Safia begged Haruna to allow rest. He refused. A wife resting too much was seen as laziness. The child was born dead. No ceremony, no mourning, just silence. Aminata did not speak for weeks after that. Something inside her closed. The third pregnancy came quickly. No one asked if she was ready. No one ever did. This time, the baby lived. A boy. The compound changed overnight. Haruna smiled for the first time. Elders came to congratulate him. Meat was cooked. Drums were beaten. Aminata lay weak on her mat. Listening to celebration she did not feel part of. Her son was named Musa. From that day, Aminata's value increased. Not because she was human, but because she had produced what was needed. She was treated more gently. She was allowed more food. But the damage had already been done. By the time she was 20, Aminata had given birth to 5 children. 2 girls survived. 1 boy survived. 2 died. Her body aged faster than her years. Her back bent. Her eyes lost their shine. She became quiet in a way that was no longer fear, but emptiness. Safia never had a son. She grew bitter, not toward Aminata, but toward herself. The village whispered that she was cursed. Haruna took a 3rd wife, a woman from a nearby village who was strong, loud, and eager to prove herself. Aminata watched quietly as the new wife rearranged the compound, claiming space, demanding attention, and asserting authority. Aminata retreated further into silence, walking softly, tending to her children, and watching the household shift around her. The compound became tense. Haruna spent less time at home, more time outside hunting and dealing with the village men. Aminata took care of the children, the fire, and the small farm, trying to keep the peace. Arguments arose, food became scarce, and Maria began asking questions that Aminata had no answers for. Years passed. The hunger that caused fathers to choose sons did not disappear. Instead, it changed form. The boys who were protected grew into men who believed they deserved more. They took more land. They took more wives. They fought more wars. The girls who were pushed away became women who carried pain into other villages. They raised daughters who feared childhood ending too soon. They raised sons who learned power without compassion. Aminata rarely returned to Umuaka, but when she did once for her mother's burial, she saw the changes in her family. Her father was dead. Her brothers owned the land. They greeted her politely, like a visitor. She tried to bond with her siblings. Sadiq nodded at her daughter Maria with respect. Usman barely spoke. She hugged Zainab, now grown and worn, their shared memories heavy between them. Words felt inadequate. That night, Aminata sat by the fire with other women. They spoke quietly, as women always did. They spoke of daughters married too early, of women buried too young, of boys raised without tenderness. Someone said, "We protected our sons." Aminata replied softly, "And lost our daughters." No one argued, because it was true. The elders had believed they were saving the village. But what they created was a world where love was thin, fear was thick, and women carried generations of quiet suffering. Aminata lived long enough to see her daughters grow. She delayed their marriages as much as she could. She taught them what her mother taught her, and more. She taught them silence when needed, and strength when possible. When Aminata returned to her compound, the evening air felt heavier than usual. The path from the village had been long and dusty, and her children walked quietly beside her, holding hands, sensing the tension in her steps. The sun was low, painting the small farm in gold and shadow, and for a moment she wished the world could stay still, if only to catch her breath. The compound looked different. The third wife, Amina, had settled in thoroughly. She had painted the walls of her own section, hung bright cloths from the rafters, and tied her goats near the kitchen in ways that blocked Aminata's usual paths. Maria and Musa stepped carefully, learning which corners were safe. Aminata's heart tightened, but she said nothing. Years of survival had taught her that silence was strength. That night, Haruna returned later than usual, his hands rough from labor outside. He barely looked at Aminata. The new wife spoke loudly, asking about livestock, chores, and the men of the village. Aminata served the evening meal without a word. She watched her children eat first, then herself, feeling the familiar emptiness in her chest. She thought of Maria, her daughter, now 7. Aminata had taught her to fold her hands at meals, to answer only when spoken to keep questions short and careful. Musa, her son, was 5, curious and brave, yet he already knew not to challenge the men of the house. Aminata's lessons of survival were already taking root. Days passed with tension simmering in every corner. The new wife demanded attention and resources, and Haruna, caught between them, seemed distant. Arguments flared quietly. A dropped pot, a goat that wandered too far, a word spoken too loudly. Aminata retreated further into routine. Fetching water, tending the small garden, cleaning, cooking, watching. Yet even in her silence, she observed everything. She watched how power shifted, how fear shaped people, how women learned to survive without being noticed. One afternoon, a visitor came from Umuaka, a cousin Aminata had grown up with. He had news of the village. Sadiq had taken a third wife himself. Usman had gone to war in the neighboring territory. Zainab had a daughter and a son, and she looked older than her years. Aminata listened silently, letting the words sink in. Each story reminded her of the choices she had been denied. She wanted to cry for her lost childhood, for the daughters who might come too soon into the world, for herself. But she did not. That night, as the children slept, Aminata sat outside under the moonlight. She traced the shapes of the earth, thinking of her mother, of Rukaya's quiet tears, of the old rules that had shaped her life. She wondered how many daughters across villages had been sent away too soon, how many bodies carried invisible scars from choices they did not make. The third wife, Aminata, tried to assert dominance. She insisted on separate cooking areas, her own water source, even her own sleeping quarters for the men. Haruna, bound by duty and pride, allowed her more freedom than Aminata had ever known. Yet Aminata endured, silently claiming the small corners that mattered most. Her children's safety, the fire, the tiny farm. She learned that power could be measured not in loud voices, but in what went unseen. Years passed. Maria grew taller, wiser than her age, and Musa showed early signs of leadership. Aminata taught them how to carry themselves carefully in the world, how to ask questions without anger, how to protect their bodies and minds. Yet even as she nurtured them, she felt the weight of her own history pressing down. Every ache in her back, every gray hair, every memory of bleeding alone in a hut reminded her of the cost of the day fathers chose sons. Her relationship with the third wife was tense but functional. They shared chores without speaking much, silently dividing responsibilities. Haruna seemed happier with the new arrangement, less restless and irritable. But Aminata knew that peace came at the cost of her own voice. She had learned long ago that survival meant bending without breaking. She smiled at her children, held them close, and let the rest of the household shift around her. When Aminata's father passed away, she returned to Umuaka once more, this time for a memorial. Sadiq had taken full control of the land. Usman's return from the war had brought respect, and Zainab had grown frail from years of hard labor and early marriage. Aminata hugged them all. Sadiq bowed to Maria, acknowledging the granddaughter he had once ignored. Zainab's eyes glistened as she held Aminata's hands, and for a moment, the women shared an understanding deeper than words. The unspoken pain of daughters raised to endure. The elders of Umuaka still whispered about protecting sons, about maintaining traditions. Aminata listened, but she no longer feared. She thought of her daughters, of how she had delayed their marriages, of the lessons she passed on about patience, survival, and choosing their own paths. She remembered the day fathers chose sons, and how that one decision had shaped decades of suffering. Back at her own compound, Aminata continued her life quietly but deliberately. She oversaw her children, guided Maria and Musa, and kept the household running. She taught them the lessons of endurance but also the lessons of hope. She reminded them that silence could be strength, but so could courage. She lived long enough to see Maria married, but not as early as she had been. She insisted her daughter know love, know herself, and know patience. Musa grew into a thoughtful man, cautious with power, and aware of the cost of entitlement. Aminata's grandchildren learned about the world differently, seeing the echoes of her past, but also the possibility of a different future. When Aminata finally passed, she left behind a home filled with quiet resilience, with children who understood both survival and care. She had endured the worst of what tradition demanded, but she had planted seeds of wisdom in her children. In her death, as in her life, she reminded the world that even when fathers chose sons, daughters carried the legacy of humanity, endurance, and memory. She never forgot the day fathers chose sons, because even though that choice fed some mouths, it starved the future. And the cost was written on women's bodies, again and again, until memory itself began to ache.